My name is Aaron Martinez, and what I'm about to tell you happened during the summer of 2023 when I took a job as a fire lookout in the remote wilderness of northwestern Montana. I was 28, recently unemployed after budget cuts hit my teaching position, and nursing wounds from a relationship that had imploded spectacularly just 3 months prior. When the Forest Service posting appeared online, decent pay, complete isolation, nothing but watching for smoke plumes, it seemed like exactly what I needed. The drive to the tower took 4 hours from the nearest town, the last 2 on increasingly primitive dirt roads that wound through dense stands of Douglas fir and lodgepole pine. My Honda Civic wasn't built for this terrain, scraping bottom on rocks and struggling through muddy ruts left by recent storms. Cell service had vanished an hour back. The silence, when I finally cut the engine at the base of the fire tower, was absolute in a way I'd never experienced. No traffic, no neighbors, no ambient hum of civilization. Just wind moving through branches and the distant call of what might have been a hawk. The tower itself rose 90 feet above the forest floor, a steel skeleton supporting a small cabin with wraparound windows on all sides. From the ground it looked impossibly tall and fragile, swaying slightly in the breeze. My predecessor was waiting at the bottom, a weathered man in his 50s named Daniels, who looked like he hadn't slept properly in months. His eyes had a hollow quality that made me uncomfortable, constantly scanning the tree line as if expecting something to emerge. "You Martinez?" he asked, shouldering a worn duffel bag. When I nodded, he handed me a set of keys and a battered spiral notebook. "Everything you need to know is in there. Radio protocols, emergency procedures, maintenance schedules." He paused, studying my face. "And the rules." I flipped through the notebook as he loaded his gear into an ancient Ford pickup. Most of it looked standard. Weather observations, fire reporting procedures, equipment checklists. But the final pages contained a list written in faded blue ink, numbered 1 through 7. Never leave the tower after dark. Do not answer voices calling your name from below. Cover all mirrors after sundown. If you see smoke in the same place twice, don't report it. Never whistle in the woods. If you see someone in the tree line waving, do not wave back. The forest will test you. Never give it permission. I looked up to find Daniels watching me intently. "Seriously?" I asked, trying to keep the amusement out of my voice. "What is this, summer camp ghost stories?" Something shifted in his expression, disappointment maybe, or pity. "So you'll understand soon enough," he said, climbing into his truck. The engine coughed to life and he leaned out the window. "Follow them exactly, Martinez, exactly. And when your replacement comes at the end of the season, make sure they understand too." The truck disappeared down the winding road, leaving me alone with 90 feet of ladder to climb, and a job I was beginning to think might be more complicated than advertised. I tucked the notebook into my back pocket and started climbing, telling myself that whatever local legends or practical jokes awaited me up there, I could handle 3 months of watching trees. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. I settled into the routine Daniels had established. Morning weather observations, hourly scans with the binoculars, logging any aircraft or unusual activity. The cabin was spartanly furnished, but comfortable enough with a narrow bed, small kitchen area, desk and communication equipment. The view was spectacular once you got used to the height. Endless green forest stretching to mountain peaks in 3 directions, a landscape so vast it made you feel both insignificant and oddly privileged to witness it. I found myself checking the notebook regularly, not for the procedures, those were straightforward enough, but for those peculiar rules at the end. In daylight, they seemed even more absurd. Never whistle in the woods. Don't answer voices from below. It read like something kids would dare each other to follow during a sleepover. I'd grown up in suburban Phoenix. My experience with wilderness extended to occasional hiking trips and summer camps. This felt like an elaborate hazing ritual for city boys who took forest jobs. On the 3rd night, I was getting ready for bed when it happened. I'd just finished brushing my teeth, standing at the small mirror above the wash basin, when I heard my name called from somewhere below the tower. "Aaron!" I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth. The voice was clear, unmistakably human, and carried perfectly through the evening air. More unsettling was its familiarity. It sounded exactly like Sarah, my ex-girlfriend, down to the slight upturn she gave the 2nd syllable of my name. "Aaron, please." "I need help." My rational mind immediately began offering explanations. Sound carried strangely in the wilderness. Maybe it was a hiker who'd gotten lost, and my brain was processing the distorted voice as familiar. Maybe it was some kind of acoustic trick, wind moving through the trees in an unusual way. I moved to the window, peering down into the darkness below the tower. "Aaron, I can see your light. Please come down." The voice was definitely coming from directly beneath me, somewhere in the shadows at the tower's base. But as I strained to look, I couldn't see anyone. More importantly, as I stood there listening, I realized something that made my blood run cold. The voice wasn't just similar to Sarah's. It was using phrases and inflections I'd heard her use dozens of times. The exact way she'd called my name when she was upset or frightened. Rule number 2 surfaced unbidden in my memory. Do not answer voices calling your name from below. I backed away from the window, heart hammering. The calling continued for another 10 minutes, growing increasingly desperate and pleading, before finally fading into silence. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair pushed against the far wall, staring at the windows and trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. When dawn came, I climbed down to check the ground around the tower's base. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no sign that anyone had been there at all. The earth was soft enough that even my own boots left clear impressions, but beneath the tower, nothing. I climbed back up and pulled out Daniel's notebook, studying those 7 rules with new attention. Whatever was happening here, someone had experienced it before. Enough times to write it down to warn the next person. I thought about Daniel's hollow eyes, the way he'd watched the tree line, and realized that whatever had put that look on his face might not be done with this place yet. A week and a half into my assignment, I had my first visitor. I spotted the ATV long before I heard it, a distant speck moving along one of the maintenance trails that connected the various fire towers in this section of the forest. The rider turned out to be another seasonal lookout named Mitch Kowalski, stationed about 12 miles northeast at Tower 7. He was close to my age, maybe a year or 2 younger, with the kind of easy confidence that suggested he'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with determination and a positive attitude. "Thought I'd come introduce myself," he said, pulling off his helmet and grinning up at me from the base of the tower. "Gets pretty lonely out here. Mind if I come up?" I was grateful for the company. We spent the afternoon swapping stories about our respective towers and the oddities of Forest Service bureaucracy. Mitch had been a park ranger in Colorado before this assignment and regaled me with tales of tourists who got lost 50 feet from parking lots and campers who tried to feed bears. When evening began to settle, I suggested he head back to his tower, but he waved off my concern. "It's only 12 miles, and I've got good lights on the ATV. Besides, I brought beer." He produced 2 cans from his backpack with a flourish. "When's the last time you had decent company?" Against my better judgment, I agreed to let him stay for a few hours. We sat on the narrow walkway outside the cabin, drinking beer and watching the sun sink behind the western peaks. As darkness gathered, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. I kept glancing at the notebook on the desk inside, thinking about rule number 1. Never leave the tower after dark. "You okay, man?" Mitch asked, noticing my distraction. I seemed jumpy. I wasn't sure how to explain without sounding crazy, so I brought out the notebook and showed him the rules. Mitch read through them, his expression shifting from curiosity to amusement to outright laughter. "Are you serious with this?" he asked, holding up the page. "This is like something out of a bad horror movie. Don't answer voices from below." "Come on, what kind of voices? Ghosts? Bigfoot?" The Forest Service has way too much time on their hands if they're coming up with pranks like this. I started to tell him about the voice I'd heard, about Sarah calling my name, but the words sounded absurd even in my own head. Instead, I just said, "The guy who was here before me seemed pretty serious about it." "Old-timers get weird when they spend too much time alone," Mitch said dismissively. "I've seen it before. They start seeing patterns in random events, making up stories to explain normal forest sounds. It's basically cabin fever with extra steps." We were still debating it when we heard the voice. "Mitchell! Mitchell, honey, where are you?" Mitch went rigid, the beer can halfway to his lips. The voice was calling from somewhere in the darkness below us, an older woman's voice with a slight Midwest accent that carried clearly through the still air. "Mitchell, I can't find you. Please answer me." Mitch's voice was barely a whisper. That's my mom. But she's in Denver. She doesn't even know where I am. I grabbed his arm as he started to stand. Don't, I said urgently. Look at the rule. Don't answer voices from below. He shook me off, moving to the railing. That's definitely her voice. Something must be wrong. Maybe she drove up, got lost trying to find the tower. He swung one leg over the railing, preparing to climb down the ladder. Mitch, no. Look around. Do you see any car lights? Any headlights on the road? How would your mother even know which tower you're at? But he was already on the ladder, descending rapidly toward the ground. Mom, he called out. I'm here. I'm coming down. Oh, Mitchell. The voice responded, filled with relief and joy. I was so worried. Come quickly, honey. I watched in horror as Mitch reached the halfway point of the ladder. The voice continued calling, guiding him down, but something about it had changed. The tone was still his mother's, but there was an odd quality to it now, as if it was being played through a speaker, with the volume turned slightly too high. Mitch was maybe 20 feet from the ground when he suddenly stopped. Wait, he said, his voice carrying up to me. Mom, how did you... The scream that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard, pure terror and agony combined, cutting through the night air like a blade. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before being abruptly cut off. Then silence. I called Mitch's name, peering down into the darkness, but there was no response. I grabbed a flashlight and swept the beam across the ground below, but I couldn't see him anywhere. The ATV sat where he'd parked it, helmet still hanging from the handlebars. No sign of struggle, no disturbed earth, no Mitch. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the cabin, radio in hand, trying to decide whether to call for help. What would I tell them? That my fellow lookout had vanished while climbing down to meet his mother, who couldn't possibly have been there. That he'd disappeared without a trace, after ignoring a list of rules that sounded like urban legends. When dawn came, I climbed down and searched the area thoroughly. Nothing, not even footprints other than my own. Mitch's ATV started on the first try, and I found his radio tuned to our standard frequency. I tried calling Tower 7, but got no response. According to the duty roster, Mitch was supposed to check in every morning at 800. He never did again. Mitch's disappearance shattered any remaining skepticism I had about the rules. Whatever had happened to him, it was connected to that voice, to his decision to climb down despite my warnings. I radioed in a missing person report, giving the dispatcher Mitch's name and tower assignment. But when I mentioned that he'd been visiting my location, the conversation became oddly formal and brief. I was told someone would follow up, but no one ever did. Unable to sleep, I began a systematic search of the tower cabin for any additional information about the rules or previous incidents. In the bottom drawer of the desk, underneath maintenance manuals and weather logs, I found a collection of notebooks and loose papers that appeared to span decades. They were in various states of decay, some water-damaged, others yellowed with age, but all contained entries from previous fire lookouts stationed at this tower. The earliest notebook I could find was dated 1987, filled with the careful handwriting of someone named Robert Chen. His entries started normally enough: weather observations, fire reports, routine maintenance notes. But as the weeks progressed, his writing became increasingly erratic. July 15th. Heard someone calling my name again last night. Third time this week. Starting to think it might not be hikers after all. July 22nd. Found a note under my door this morning. Just my name written over and over in different handwriting. Door was locked. No one could have gotten up here. July 28th. The mirrors. Something's wrong with the mirrors. My reflection doesn't always match what I'm doing. Following the old rules now. Better safe than sorry. The entries stopped abruptly on August 3rd, mid-sentence. Something's been scratching at the base of the tower all night. Getting closer to, I found similar patterns in notebook after notebook. Names I'd never heard. Patricia Williams, 1991, David Rodriguez, 1995, Jennifer Walsh, 2003. All started confident and professional. All gradually descended into paranoia and fear. Many ended without explanation, sometimes mid-word, as if the writer had been interrupted and never returned. But it was a loose sheet of paper, tucked between two notebooks, that made my blood run cold. Written in shaky pencil was an expanded version of the rules I'd been given. Never leave the tower after dark. 2. Do not answer voices calling your name from below. 3. Cover all mirrors after sundown. 4. If you see smoke in the same place twice, don't report it. 5. Never whistle in the woods. 6. If you see someone in the tree line waving, do not wave back. 7. The forest will test you, never give it permission. 8. If you hear the fire bell ring at night, pray. 9. Never count the windows in your cabin after midnight. 10. If your reflection smiles before you do, don't look again. Below this, in different handwriting, someone had added, the rules aren't protection. They're negotiation. It lets you live if you follow them exactly. Most of the time, I spent hours poring over these documents, trying to piece together a coherent picture of what I was dealing with. The consistency was disturbing. Every lookout across multiple decades had encountered the same phenomena. The voices calling from below, the problems with mirrors and reflections, the sense that something in the forest was actively testing them, probing for weaknesses. One entry from a lookout named Marcus Thompson in 2008 was particularly detailed. It's not random. Whatever this is, it's intelligent. It watches and learns. First week, it just tests the basic rules. Voices calling, reflections acting weird. If you pass those tests, it escalates. Starts using voices of people you actually know. Gets more creative with the psychological pressure. Jenny, Tower 4, told me it once mimicked her daughter's voice for 3 straight hours, crying for help from different directions. Said it knew things only her daughter would know. The smoke rule is the big one. That's the final test. When you see smoke in the same spot twice, it's not a real fire. It's something else. Something that wants you to break protocol to call it in. Jenny's predecessor ignored the rule, reported the smoke. They found his tower empty the next morning, radio still broadcasting an empty channel. I closed the notebook and looked around the cabin with new eyes. How many people had sat in this same chair, reading these same warnings, hoping they were elaborate pranks? How many had vanished after making small, seemingly insignificant mistakes? Outside, the forest stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and serene in the afternoon light. But I was beginning to understand that beauty was a mask, and something ancient and patient was watching from behind it, waiting for me to give it the permission it needed, to collect another lookout who didn't quite follow the rules. 3 days after discovering the notebooks, my weekly supply drop arrived. Usually the Forest Service driver would unload the boxes at the base of the tower, honk twice, and drive away without stopping to chat. This time was different. Instead of the usual hurried efficiency, the driver, a man I hadn't seen before, lingered after stacking the supplies, looking up at the tower with an expression I couldn't quite read. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with the weathered face and steady hands of someone who'd spent his entire career in the Forest Service. When I climbed down to collect the supplies, he was still standing there studying the tree line with the same cautious attention I'd seen in Daniel's. "You're the new lookout," he said. It wasn't a question. "Name's Hank Billings. I've been running supplies out here for, 23 years now." I introduced myself and started loading boxes onto the pulley system I used to haul supplies up to the cabin. Hank made no move to leave, instead walking slowly around the base of the tower, occasionally glancing up at the steel framework above us. "You've read the rules, haven't you?" he asked suddenly, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still air. I stopped loading boxes and stared at him. "You know about the rules?" Hank's laugh had no humor in it. "Son, I've been delivering supplies to fire towers across this region for more than 2 decades. I've seen a lot of lookouts come and go. Some finish their season and transfer to other locations. Others," he shrugged, "others don't. What happened to them? Same thing that happened to your friend from Tower 7. Same thing that's been happening since they built these towers back in the 50s. Hank pulled a thermos from his truck and poured himself coffee, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "This forest is old, Martinez. Older than the trees you see now. Older than the fire service. Older than the people who named these mountains. There are things here that were here before the first human ever walked through these woods." I thought about the notebooks upstairs, the decades of vanished lookouts. Why doesn't anyone do anything about it? Why keep staffing the towers if people keep disappearing? "Because the towers serve a purpose," Hank said, meeting my eyes. "Not just fire spotting. There's accommodation. A way for something very old and very patient to coexist with the modern world. The rules aren't there to protect you. They're a negotiation. You follow them exactly, And maybe if you're lucky and careful, it lets you leave at the end of the season. He finished his coffee and screwed the cap back onto the thermos. Most people can't handle the truth. They try to rationalize it, find logical explanations, convince themselves it's all coincidence or psychological pressure. Those people don't last long. The ones who survive are the ones who accept that some things can't be explained, only endured. Hank climbed back into his truck, then paused with his hand on the door. One more thing, Martinez. If you ever see your reflection smile before you do, don't look again. Whatever you do, don't try to figure out what it means. Just look away and keep looking away until morning. The truck's engine rumbled to life, and Hank rolled down his window. Next supply drop is in 6 days. I'll be interested to see if you're still here to receive it. I watched his truck disappear down the dirt road, leaving me alone with the knowledge that I wasn't fighting my imagination or succumbing to isolation-induced paranoia. This was real. The rules were real. The danger was real. And somewhere in the vast green expanse surrounding my tower, something was waiting patiently for me to make a mistake. That night, I covered every reflective surface in the cabin with towels and sheets before sunset. I'd been following that rule since reading the notebooks, but Hank's warning about reflections smiling first made me understand that even looking at mirrors might be more dangerous than I'd realized. As darkness settled over the forest, I found myself sitting with my back to the covered mirrors, suddenly aware that I had no idea what might be looking back at me from behind the cloth. 2 weeks had passed since Mitch's disappearance when the storm hit. It came in fast from the northwest, one of those sudden mountain storms that can turn a clear afternoon into a chaos of wind, rain, and lightning in a matter of minutes. I'd tracked its approach on radar and battened down everything that could blow around, but the intensity still caught me off guard. The tower swayed more than usual in the gusting wind, and lightning strikes seemed to be hitting the surrounding ridges every few seconds. I was monitoring the radio for weather updates when I heard the voice calling through the storm. Help! Please, someone help me. The voice was barely audible over the wind and rain, but it was definitely coming from below the tower. I moved to the window, peering down into the darkness. Lightning flashes illuminated the forest floor sporadically, but I couldn't see anyone. I'm hurt. Please, I can't move. My heart began to race as I recognized the voice. It was Mitch, unmistakably Mitch, calling up from somewhere in the shadows below. But Mitch had vanished 2 weeks ago. Whatever had taken him then, there was no way he could be down there now, injured but alive. Aaron, I know you're up there. Please help me. My leg is broken. The voice was filled with pain and desperation, exactly the way Mitch would sound if he really were injured and trapped. Every instinct I had screamed at me to grab a flashlight and climb down to help him. Rule number 2 became a mantra in my head. Do not answer voices calling your name from below. But this felt different. This wasn't just someone calling my name, this was my friend, in obvious distress begging for help. Aaron, please, whatever happened before, whatever you think you saw, I'm really here now. I've been hiding in the woods, but I'm hurt. I need help. I gripped the window frame, torn between human decency and the warnings I'd been given. What if it really was Mitch? What if somehow he'd survived whatever happened that night and had been struggling to get back to safety? Could I live with myself if I let him die because I was too paranoid to help? I can see your light. I know you can hear me. Don't leave me out here. Lightning illuminated the forest floor directly below the tower, and for just a moment I saw him. A figure lying crumpled at the base of the ladder, one arm reaching upward. Even in the brief flash, it looked exactly like Mitch. Same build, same clothing, same distinctive red jacket he'd been wearing the night he disappeared. I moved toward the hatch, my hand on the latch. The voice continued calling, growing weaker, more desperate. Aaron, please. I'm so cold. I can't feel my legs. Rule number 2. Do not answer voices calling your name from below. But what if the rules were wrong? What if they were just paranoid delusions passed down by lookouts who'd cracked under the isolation? What if I was about to let my friend die because I'd been brainwashed by ghost stories? I lifted the hatch and started down the ladder. I made it maybe 10 rungs before I stopped, something nagging at the back of my mind. In the next lightning flash, I looked down at the figure below and saw something that made my blood freeze. The person at the base of the tower was definitely wearing Mitch's red jacket, had Mitch's build and hair color, but something was wrong with the proportions. The arms were too long. The neck bent at an angle that wasn't quite right, and when the figure looked up at me, its mouth opened too wide, revealing darkness that seemed to extend far deeper than any human throat. "Come down, Aaron," it said in Mitch's voice. "Come help me. It won't hurt. It's easier if you just come down." I scrambled back up the ladder and slammed the hatch shut, throwing the bolt and backing away as fast as I could. The voice continued calling for another hour, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, occasionally shifting to other voices, Sarah, my mother, even Hank from the supply run. But I'd seen what was really down there, and I knew that whatever was wearing Mitch's appearance was definitely not my friend. The scratching started around midnight. Long, deliberate scrapes against the steel framework of the tower, as if something with claws was slowly climbing upward. I spent the rest of the storm sitting in the center of the cabin, as far from the windows as possible, listening to the methodical progress of whatever was trying to reach me. It never quite made it to the cabin level, but every few minutes I'd hear it repositioning itself, searching for a different route up. When dawn finally came and the storm passed, I climbed down to examine the tower's base. Deep gouges marked the steel supports, too regular to be random damage, too precise to be from any animal I knew about. Whatever had been down there during the storm had very sharp claws and had been systematically testing the tower's structure for weaknesses. I climbed back up and opened Daniel's notebook to the rules, running my finger down the list until I found the one that had saved my life. Do not answer voices, calling your name from below. Someone had underlined it in red ink and written in the margin, no matter who it sounds like, no matter what they say, no exceptions. I was beginning to understand that the rules weren't suggestions or outdated superstitions. They were survival instructions, written in the blood of lookouts who hadn't followed them carefully enough. The final test came during my 7th week at the tower, on a clear morning when the forest stretched endlessly in all directions under a cloudless sky. I was conducting my routine fire scan, slowly sweeping the binoculars across each sector, when I spotted smoke rising from a distant ridge about 8 miles to the northeast. The smoke column was thin but distinct, rising straight up in the still air. I marked the location on my map, estimated the coordinates, and reached for the radio to report it. Standard procedure: spot smoke, report location, let the fire crews determine whether it was a legitimate threat or a controlled burn. But as I lifted the radio handset, something nagged at my memory. I lowered the binoculars and checked my logbook, flipping back through the previous week's entries. There it was, 5 days earlier. Smoke reported from the same location, same coordinates, same appearance. I'd called it in then, and the fire crews had found nothing. No fire, no burn scar, no explanation for the smoke I'd clearly observed. Rule number 4 surfaced in my mind. If you see smoke in the same place twice, don't report it. I set the radio down and raised the binoculars again. The smoke was still there, but as I watched, it seemed to be changing. Instead of the natural, irregular drift of a forest fire, this smoke was moving in patterns that looked almost deliberate. Spirals, figure eights, shapes that resembled letters, words. My training screamed at me to report it. Forest fires could spread with terrifying speed under the right conditions, and even a small blaze could become a major threat within hours. If I failed to report a legitimate fire and people got hurt, I'd be responsible. But the rule was explicit, and everything else I'd experienced had taught me that the rules existed for good reasons. As I watched, the smoke column thickened and darkened, rising higher into the sky. But instead of the gray-white color of burning vegetation, this smoke was taking on an oily black quality that seemed to absorb light rather than scatter it. And within that darkness, shapes were forming, human figures writhing and dancing in the column, their mouths open in what might have been screams or laughter. The radio crackled to life behind me, even though I hadn't touched it. Tower 12, this is dispatch. We're seeing reports of smoke in your sector. Please confirm and provide coordinates. I turned to stare at the radio. I hadn't reported anything. How could dispatch know about smoke they shouldn't be able to see from their location? Tower 12, respond please. We need immediate confirmation of fire location. I picked up the handset but didn't press the transmit button. Through the binoculars, the smoke had taken on an even more unnatural appearance. The figures within it were more distinct now, and they seemed to be beckoning toward the tower, gesturing for me to come closer. To report what I was seeing, Aaron. The voice came from the radio, but it wasn't dispatch. It was Mitch's voice, clear and urgent. "Aaron, you have to report this fire. People could die if you don't call it in." My finger hovered over the transmit button. The smoke was definitely unnatural. No forest fire produced shapes like that, moved in those patterns. But what if I was wrong? What if my weeks of isolation and paranoia had finally cracked my judgment? What if there really was a fire, and I was seeing things that weren't there? "Aaron, please." Now it was Sarah's voice coming from the radio. "Just report it. What's the worst that could happen? You'll feel silly when they find out it's nothing." I looked at the rule again. If you see smoke in the same place twice, don't report it. No exceptions, no qualifications. Just don't report it. I set the radio down and stepped back from the window. The moment I stopped looking at the smoke, the voices from the radio stopped too. When I raised the binoculars again 5 minutes later, the smoke had vanished completely, leaving clear skies over the ridge where it had been rising. But as I lowered the binoculars, movement caught my eye in the tree line directly below the tower. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden in shadow. Even at this distance, I could see it was roughly human-shaped, but something about its proportions seemed wrong. It raised one arm and began to wave at me, a slow, deliberate gesture of greeting. Rule number 6. If you see someone in the tree line waving, do not wave back. The figure continued waving, and as I watched through the binoculars, I realized with growing horror that it looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same face. It was wearing the clothes I'd worn yesterday, a blue flannel shirt I'd left hanging on a hook downstairs. But this version of myself was smiling in a way I'd never smiled, with too many teeth and eyes that reflected the sunlight like an animal's. My doppelganger stopped waving and cupped its hands around its mouth. Even from 8 stories up, I could hear its voice perfectly. "Your turn, Aaron, come down and take your turn." I backed away from the window and sat heavily in my chair, hands shaking. The fake fire, the impossible smoke, and now something wearing my face waiting in the forest below. Whatever intelligence governed this place had been testing me systematically, probing for weaknesses, waiting for me to break even one rule. The fire test had been the big one, the final examination that would determine whether I lived or died. And somehow, by following a rule that went against every instinct I had as a fire lookout, I'd passed. But the thing in the tree line suggested that passing the test didn't mean I was safe. It just meant I'd earned the right to survive until something else tried to claim me. When I looked out the window again an hour later, the figure was gone. But I knew it was still out there somewhere, wearing my face, waiting patiently for me to make the mistake that would give it permission to take my place permanently. My replacement arrived on a crisp morning in late September, exactly 12 weeks after I'd climbed the tower for the first time. Jake Thompson was young, maybe 24, with the eager enthusiasm of someone who'd never encountered anything stranger than a difficult hiking trail. As I packed my belongings and prepared to brief him on the tower's operations, I found myself in the same position Daniels had been in, trying to figure out how to explain the rules to someone who would inevitably think they were elaborate pranks. I handed Jake the notebook, watching his expression change as he flipped to the final pages. He laughed just as I had, just as Mitch had. "Seriously? Are you guys still doing this hazing thing? Next you'll tell me about the ghost who haunts the supply shed." I tried to explain about Mitch's disappearance, about the voices and the smoke and the figure that looked like me. Jake listened politely, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. To him, I probably looked exactly like Daniels had looked to me, hollow-eyed, paranoid, someone who'd spent too much time alone and started seeing patterns in random events. "Look," Jake said finally, "I appreciate you trying to keep the tradition alive, but I'm here to spot fires and maintain equipment. I'm not really interested in ghost stories." I left him the notebooks I'd found, stacked neatly in the desk drawer. "Just read them," I told him. "When things start happening, and they will start happening, read the experiences of everyone who's been here before you." The drive back to civilization felt surreal. After 3 months of absolute isolation, the gradual reappearance of houses, then towns, then traffic lights and strip malls, seemed like visiting an alien world. But even as I rejoiced in simple pleasures, a hot shower, a restaurant meal, the sound of human conversation, I found myself checking mirrors obsessively, covering them at night, listening for voices that might call my name. I tried to report Mitch's disappearance through official channels, but encountered the same bureaucratic indifference Hank had warned me about. Missing persons reports were filed and promptly lost. Tower 7's duty roster showed no record of anyone named Mitchell Kowalski ever being assigned there. When I pressed for answers, supervisors grew uncomfortable and changed the subject. It became clear that whatever happened in the remote towers was considered an acceptable cost of doing business, as long as no one asked too many questions. The nightmares started 2 weeks after I returned home. Always the same scenario. I'd be back in the tower hearing voices calling from below, and I'd forget about the rules. I'd climb down to help someone in distress, only to find myself face to face with something that wore a familiar appearance, but wasn't quite right in ways I couldn't articulate. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, immediately reaching for lights and checking that all mirrors in my apartment were properly covered. 3 months later, I received a call from the Forest Service. Jake Thompson had failed to check in for his morning radio call. A helicopter search had found the tower empty, with no sign of where he'd gone. His belongings were still there. The logbooks showed entries right up until the previous day, and there was no indication of foul play. Just another lookout who'd vanished without explanation. They offered me Jake's position for the following season. "You know the area," the supervisor said. "You understand the unique challenges of the assignment." I declined, but I kept Daniel's notebook, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I flipped to the final page where someone had written in shaky handwriting, "The tower doesn't keep the forest out. It keeps you in. And when it's done with you, it finds another." Below that, in different ink, someone had added, "Follow the rules." All of them. Exactly as written. It's the only negotiation you'll get. I've thought about adding my own warning to that page, something that might help the next person who takes the job. But what could I say that hadn't already been said? The rules are clear. The consequences are documented. The choice, ultimately, is whether you're willing to believe that some things in the forest are older and more patient than human understanding, and that survival sometimes depends on following instructions that make no sense until it's too late to learn why they matter. I still cover my mirrors after dark. I still refuse to answer my phone if no one speaks when I pick up, and sometimes when I'm hiking in the mountains near my new home, I hear voices calling my name from places where no one could possibly be. I don't answer them. I've learned that lesson well enough to last a lifetime. The forest is still out there, and it's still patient. Somewhere in northwestern Montana, another tower stands watch over endless green wilderness, and another lookout is learning that the rules aren't suggestions. I hope they're better at following instructions than Jake was. I hope they understand that some negotiations only happen once. Marcus Chen climbed the 90-foot ladder with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his ability to handle whatever challenges awaited him. At 26, he was a former Marine with wilderness survival training and experience in fire suppression from his previous job in California. The Forest Service had been eager to place him at Tower 12, especially given the high turnover rate at that particular location. He found the cabin well maintained and properly stocked, with detailed logbooks documenting weather patterns, fire reports and maintenance schedules. In the desk drawer, he discovered a collection of older notebooks and a newer spiral-bound book with operational procedures. He flipped through the pages, noting the meticulous record-keeping of his predecessors, until he reached the final entries. There, written in neat handwriting, was a numbered list titled Additional Operational Guidelines. Never leave the tower after dark. 2. Do not answer voices calling your name from below. 3. Cover all mirrors after sundown. 4. If you see smoke in the same place twice, don't report it. 5. Never whistle in the woods. 6. If you see someone in the tree line waving, do not wave back. 7. The forest will test you, never give it permission. 8. If you hear the fire bell ring at night, pray. 9. Never count the windows in your cabin after midnight. 10. If your reflection smiles before you do, don't look again. Marcus laughed and shook his head. Every remote assignment had its traditions, and pranking new employees with elaborate ghost stories was practically a rite of passage. He'd heard similar warnings at other postings: don't camp in certain areas, avoid specific trails after dark, watch out for haunted equipment sheds. It was all part of the culture. a way for veterans to mess with rookies and maintain the mystique of wilderness work. He tossed the notebook back in the drawer and focused on setting up his equipment and learning the radio protocols. Outside the windows, the forest stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and peaceful in the afternoon light. It seemed like the perfect place to spend a quiet season, earning good money while enjoying some of the most spectacular wilderness views in the country. As evening approached, Marcus unpacked his gear and prepared dinner, occasionally glancing at the collection of notebooks in the drawer. Maybe he'd read through them later, if only for entertainment value. Some of the ghost stories were probably pretty creative, especially after decades of lookouts adding their own embellishments to the legend. In the gathering darkness below the tower, something moved through the trees with patient, deliberate steps. It had been waiting since the previous lookout's departure, and it was always interested in meeting the new residents. The fresh ones were often the most entertaining, so confident in their rational worldview, so certain that the modern world had explanations for everything. Soon, it would begin the familiar process of introduction, a voice calling from the darkness, a familiar face in an impossible place. Small tests to determine whether this new lookout understood the rules of engagement, or if he would need to learn them the hard way. The forest had been playing this game for a very long time, and it was exceptionally good at it. Patient as stone, creative as nightmare, and always ready to welcome another guest who thought he understood the difference between civilization and wilderness. Above, Marcus finished his dinner and settled in for his first night of duty, still chuckling occasionally about the absurd list of rules someone had left for him. Outside his windows, the vast Montana wilderness stretched away into darkness, beautiful and ancient, and utterly indifferent to human assumptions about what was possible in the deep woods. The game was about to begin again,